Blasphemy is very, very big in Muslim countries. So Hinduism, as Islam, is really kind of a state-sponsored. So India is state-sponsored religion. Hinduism, many Muslim majority countries, they practice some form of Sharia law, whereas they look to the Quran for their actual governing principles. So it's kind of interesting, very different than I would say Christianity, where we kind of, or at least in our culture, kind of separation of church and state. So and then really interesting too, it's Pride Month. So from a secular celebrating homosexuality, transgenderism, name whatever acronym you want to throw out there. Now it's kind of all over the place. All different companies are celebrating it, whatever. It's super interesting, just to point it out, that no one ever celebrates this in the Middle East. So the U.S. flag will come down at the embassy at the Vatican and put up a Progress Gay Pride flag, but they won't do that in Saudi Arabia. So kind of interesting how it's, now obviously the Vatican isn't Christianity from the Bible, but we can see there's definitely persecution geared towards Christians because Christianity is much more tolerant of that. From my experiences in the Middle East, I mean, we had to go through all kinds of sensitivity training and all this. Muslims, at least, were very, very, what's the right word? Just sensitive to any type of perceived slights. And so you had to go above and beyond to make sure that they know that you respect whatever their beliefs are. So, kind of interesting. I messed my stuff up. All right. And then also last one from in the news, I promise. So this one was, this is the Washington Post, right? This isn't some obscure, blog or whatever. So it's this lady, she's 28 years old. Says a few months ago that Colleen realized she was falling out of touch with her spiritual side of life. She felt lost. For her, reviving it meant drawing closer to the earth. Capital E, right? The earth, Mother Earth. So Kane, 28, revived practices she had started but set aside earlier in her 20s and adding new ones, checking on astrology newsletter, doing rituals, stuff with full moons, meditating with crystals, looking for ways to integrate with and being guided by ancestors who she believes have passed on to a mysterious energy that binds all living things. And we think this is absolutely ridiculous, right? You look at that and like, is this a spoof article? No, this is the way a lot of people, especially I don't want to sound like a old man yelling at clouds, but this is the way a lot of the younger type. This is earthly wisdom. This is real life. And so I'm reminded of two verses right here. We want to go to 1 Corinthians 3:18. Let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you seems to be wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. Wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, He catches the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knows. Therefore, let no one boast in men, for all things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, or the world or life or death, all things present or things to come, all are yours, and you are Christ, and Christ is God's. And then also, Stephen, you referenced Acts 17 last week with Billy, that there's people are groping for Christ. There's an emptiness that they have, that they're yearning for eternity. But where are they turning? They're turning to magic crystals because that's the wisdom of the age. That is wise. People look at that and, okay, yeah, this is where it's at, not the foolishness of God. So, any comments for? Well, y'all see that too. Very much so. Kind of floors me every time I see it. So, feedback from Billy's class. What'd y'all think? Okay, very great, very good. I was nervous about the internet connectivity and everything else, but I think it was and it's kind of a crazy thing to kind of step back and be super appreciative and thankful to the good things that come from technology. That how amazing is it that we can at this exact same time have a video conference with someone literally on the other side of the world, right? So, what were kind of overview of Hindu doctrine from what I remember? Anything stick out that?
Wait, there's just no love.
No love. It's very cause effect. You do this in this life, this is the effective next slide. No rhyme, no reason, no thought process, just you do, and it is what it is.
Yeah, it's like carrot stick, like which one?
Yeah.
There's no, yeah, you're just a pawn in the sea of
On in this game.
game, yeah.
It was a lot more complicated. And I don't know. I mean, I knew there were hundreds of gods. I didn't know there were millions of
Millions, yeah.
gods, but also just there doesn't really seem to be any standard. It kind of just seems like whatever the leaders, say is kind of the thing, and it I think a lot of it's probably passed down like oral tradition, and they have these things that they do, but probably not all of them do it. It may be regional, like it just seems kind of like very subjective. Just whatever you want to do is cool.
Right, yeah, yeah, and there are, there, I think it's Vedas or Verdas, I forget, that they're different books, and then they have other texts outside of that, but again, like what is actually taught, there's nothing about creation, so.
Their thousands of gods are like more corrupt than humanity. And that's what our gods do.
And working against each other, one will lie and justify just to, there's some hierarchy they're trying to achieve.
And they have favoritism.
Yeah.
Humans. So it's like, yeah, let's try to do what they do. So they
My God versus, literally my God versus your God.
Seem very carnal in just every way I can imagine, and it supports the powerful in society. So to me, it was a societal structure more than a religion. Really, it was way just to promote their own carnal desires.
Very much so. And the thing that strikes me too is, if you want to say further what you're saying, is that it's state-sponsored religion.
Yeah.
Is pushed down. This is what you believe. So, if we ever think that, I kind of started off talking about how Christians might be persecuted a little bit. It's Pride Month. Whatever. I mean, Hinduism is a whole nother level. I mean, we didn't want to put different things or the comments from Billy on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, just because like he legitimately could be killed.
Yeah.
Or his family killed or whatever it might be. So I mean, that is a big concern. He was talking about when they had, I think, a congregation down in Austin, there were several members were going over there, and he was saying, hey, let's keep it to a minimum, because like you'll start drawing attention if you have too many Westerners coming in. It's like, well, what's going on over here? That's a whole other kind of realm, almost a different planet that is lived on. And we're going to kind of get into that with Islam too. And a question I'm going to have in a little bit, hopefully I get to it, is how do you have a conversation with someone that has a completely different worldview than you? And here's another aspect of that. You understand that they don't have the same worldview and that there's a delta between you, but they don't. They can't comprehend that you have a whole nother worldview. So how do you even start having a conversation? So kind of keep that rattling in the back of your brain. And that overseas, like that's something that was just constantly a source of frustration and anger a lot of times, that my own shortcomings. So what do y'all think as far as techniques to reach out, topics to talk with the Hindu?
Just, since they're not opposed to another god, you can start talking about just, as Paul did on Mars Hill, the true God and the love that comes from the true God. That sacrificial love is so foreign, both to Islam and to Hinduism, that because we are from two different worldviews, the only way to bridge that gap then would be build a personal relationship of, I do care about you. It's not a matter of pure logic at that point.
Right. And I mean, it's again, coming from a Western Christian background, the idea that someone believes that there are almost an infinite number of gods. It's hard for me to comprehend and have that gap, but that's, I think, Stephen, you brought that up to him, talking about, the God that you're worshiping that you may not know is there, that this is the God. So yeah, very good. Any other topics?
I don't remember if he talked about it last week. Billy in past conversations has said the successes for him has been one God, one sacrifice, and the forgiveness of sins. So those were like the trifecta of everything that people are responsive to, and they're like reaching out for it, and he's just got to feed it out to them.
What a relief that must be.
What's that?
What a
Oh yeah.
relief that must
Well,
be.
he said there's you're pleasing, 2 million gods, but I mean, you got all the rest of them mad at you. Always have a
Yeah.
God that's angry at you for something. Okay, so you have that, and then also just you have with that, you have like a lot of burden for the things that you've done. So to have forgiveness of that, washing it away, that's just great. And then they still do a lot of sacrifices. And so not to have to go through all of those ritualistic things, that's a big deal too.
We talked the human sacrifice element. I think you had talked to him before about it.
Yeah, he talked to about like he gave a presentation, and there's tribal places that still do some of those things where they will do human sacrifices. Not in the cities, not in the big places, but some of in those, they'll get the local witch doctor will, find someone that they want to sacrifice to alleviate the tribe of all of their sins, that burden. And people buy into it because they're looking for something, right? Because they want this erased away. And so they'll even sacrifice a human to make it happen. And so they find some unknowing young lady. It's usually a virgin, and then they'll get her drunk, and then they'll, sacrifice her. And then it's a big like party festival thing. But he said that he saved a lady who actually has become a Christian because of it. She was devastated to find out later on when she sobered up that her village wanted to kill her.
And they're not knowing they're not willing sacrifices.
They're not willing to sacrifice. They don't know this. They don't know that they've been chosen until, they're gone. And so he saved a lady from that in a tribal village and brought her back and explained to her what was happening and showed her the pictures of what had happened. And she's now a Christian. She's like, this is not what I'm after.
I can't imagine having those pictures on my phone.
And think about, I mean, that, and no, I was gonna say, to Billy talked about, I mean, basically they kidnapped her. It's what it came down to. And you think, okay, that's just some wild, crazy example, no, this is real life. This isn't, 1530 in India. This is like 5 years ago, and think about if you're in that situation as far as breaking laws, state laws versus following Christ. I mean, these are real things. And obviously, God willing, none of us would be put in a situation like that, but it might be a variant of that where you might have to, go against what a secular law is for the just morality or the cause of Christ.
I would call it rescuing, because
that's great.
She was running through the city so they could all see her before they kill her. And so they went through there and they rescued her. It wasn't kidnapping. That wasn't what they wanted. But she didn't know. She was running. But something that's at least been received well when I talk to someone who's pantheistic is, which this is Hinduism.
Yeah.
Is question about how does it make sense when you look at what you know of the physical world and the universe and show how things work together so smoothly and how systems replenish themselves. Would it make sense for that to happen if hundreds of millions of gods were battling each other? That the river god was battling against the sea god and against the air and against the sun. And would these things work the way we see them? So we can't ignore the evidence for our eyes that things have an order. They have a system. And that's hard for someone to answer that is a pantheist. They're like, okay, how would that work? And how that's the control parts of our bodies in their view. Like, well, how does this body work? Anyway, that at least starts the conversation.
At least make them think.
Yeah, makes you think. How does my belief system impact just what I see in front of my face? And that's God says we can see God in the things that He's made,
Right.
and so that I appeal to that.
And even, great point. And then even creativity, right? Like they literally have no idea.
Yeah.
So we were talking. You want to say about which one?
Julie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking is that we were talking about the class and how they really don't know why they believe. And Julie's little friend she plays with at recess every day is Indian, and she's asked her one time, like, what do y'all believe? And she just said, she was like, I don't know. She was like, we just do what we're told. We don't know why we do it.
Yeah.
And feel like the example right here. Just enough from a Catholicism.
Which is like, yes, still alive. Like she's talking about her kids. All right. Good. Yeah. great example. And then, so if a Hindu asks you all about, why your faith is what it is, the hope that you have, how would you respond? I think, Tim, you're probably closest thing. One sacrifice. Anybody have any? Looks like an elevator. You got 5 seconds. How would you?
It's interesting that you talk about the equality that we have.
Yeah.
Everybody.
No partiality.
No partiality.
And it's
No, we have
fascinating
to
too.
system.
It's like 99%, I mean, 95, 90, whatever it said, that are the lowest of the low, right? And I mean, like that's amazing. That's good. Yeah, there's no hope whatsoever. You just live out this life until, hopefully the next one you're better.
Jason brought up, how do they know what life they're on if they only get 7? I was like, oh my God. And so if you're in the lowest caste system and you don't know what life you're on, how do you have hope that you can move up?
Tim,
So, well, you brought my point. You said it, I didn't know that was where most of his perception of the word was from the lowest cast member, but that makes sense. But it's fascinating to me because a lot of times in our mind, we say, okay, in this culture, they're like this, right? So I think that lots of Hindus or people coming from India, they will actually be almost an example to us on how to be followers of something. They're very humble. They're they don't need a lot of means to make it. I mean, they are very simple. But if you're at the top level of that caste system, and you may have seen folks like this, they're as hedonistic as you can find. I mean, it's like there's not enough money out there to support whatever they want.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because in my mind, some of the folks that I work with and see and like that they're in the lower caste system, or come from that. And so if anything to gain from it's that humility from that lowest member of the caste system, like, okay, I can live like that.
right. And I mean, you take it a step further, maybe, and apply it to ourselves, because if you think in terms of world wealth on a line, where are we at, as a collective, as the US, like we're way on one side of that, extremely wealthy, right? You know how much it costs to support a preacher in India? Like $200 a month. Think about that. $200 a month. Support a man that has a family. Like he's not just individual. It's crazy. Can you imagine? Like, man, hey, $200 a month, go get them. There's no way. It's literally right? It's not possible. Right. So again, this kind of my point being, we need to make sure that we're not following that hedonism. So, good. Okay, I'll stop rambling here. Thank y'all for that. So switching gears to Islam, right? Here we go. Second major shift. I told a lie by accident. We're what I meant to bring up a second ago with Hinduism. I intentionally put Mormonism after Hinduism because what I would submit to y'all is that, and this little foreshadowing, Mormonism is more akin to Hinduism than it is to Christianity. So they have a belief that there's an almost infinite number of gods also, and that we can all become gods, and that God Jehovah came from that, and there's an infinite number of those gods. And that's something that I didn't know before I started looking at this, and they believe. So it's not just another form of Christianity. So I'm glad this is coming on the heels of Hinduism. So anyways, now to come back to my other one. Sorry, I'm jumping around a lot. Islam. So if y'all can remember, so Muhammad, last of the prophets, from what we talked about, he's the one that basically created the religion. So he initially questioned his own call from God to be a prophet, and he thought initially that he was possessed by jinn, which are evil spirits in their minds. Okay, so jinn, we were talking about last week, can be a very, very deep and interesting or weird, depending on how you are topic. We're not going to jump into jinn per se, but if you want to go for it, go for it. It's really interesting, but point is, he thought he was being possessed by basically the devil or demons, and instead it turned out to be God's call. So that's interesting. And then if you remember that in the Quran itself, there are verses that are called the satanic verses. So Michael the archangel, or Gabriel imparted all of these revelations to Muhammad to create the Quran. But some of those actually weren't Gabriel, they were Satan. And so Satan revealed some of these verses. They ended up getting in the Quran. And it wasn't until later that Muhammad caught it, pointed those out, and then so they are recorded, but they're kind of pointing back and like, okay, that's not real. That's from Satan, but it's still in the Quran. So kind of interesting. Well, but there's one bit of kind of logical inconsistency here that I want to point out too, is that Muslims can't resist Allah. And if you remember about absolute predetermination, like it's very literally God or Allah controls all aspects of everything. If a bird falls out of the sky, well, that was Allah's will. Everything happens. Man does not have his own free will. So very Calvinistic kind of is what we would say. But how can Muhammad resist these calls if later on he's going to say, well, everything happens through the will of God? So I thought it was kind of interesting. And if you have any comments, please just interrupt me. Another kind of logical inconsistency too is, well, if there are satanic verses, what makes it where Satan wasn't influencing all the rest? Or how do you know that Satan wasn't the one that pointed back at those other verses and said, no, those are from Satan, but it could be Satan saying those are from Satan, those are actually from God. Like there's a lot of weird, once you introduce that can of worms, there's no way of disproving anything. So that's one of those that really sticks with me. That point isn't a stumbling block for Muslims, and I can't like me understand why. Like if you just were told like, hey, Paul, or say Peter in First Peter, just some of it, whoops, that was part of Satan. I would question the entire book and anything that he ever referenced.
I think maybe they rationalize it in their mind or decide that, well, hey, in the Bible, there's recorded statements from Satan there. And so if the Bible records Satan, satanic statements, things that Satan said, then why do you have a problem with the Quran saying that? Our problem is that it was identified in the scriptures through inspiration, whereas it was identified later by Muhammad saying, oh, well, that shouldn't be in there now.
Right.
And so it's different in that aspect, but just the simple fact that there's something quoted from Satan in there.
Right.
That shouldn't.
Well, and the difference being that in the Quran, those satanic verses were disguised that they were supposed to be from Allah or from God. So whereas in, say, Job, that he's quoting Satan, it's, Satan says this. He's not masquerading that, hey, this is God, and Satan talked to Job, and oh, actually it was God that talked to him. There's none of that. So the distinction is very, very different,
But I
but
think we need to
absolutely.
make that distinction.
Very good point.
Flip it around and go, what do you mean? There's Satan's quoted in your scriptures.
Right.
The Bible, like we can show you. Well, that's different. It's like you said, it wasn't deception. It's just
Right.
statements of fact.
Right. And the deception again, it blows my mind because once you introduce that, it's like a poison pill. Everything else is corrupted. Or at least in my mind. And again, tell me if I'm making logical leaps here that I shouldn't. So one way of validating scripture, I might have given an answer for later on, but y'all are good. So the only physical miracle that was ever done by Muhammad is the actual creation of the Quran itself. And so when you talk to a Muslim about the Quran, Matt, what's your, sorry, there's no previous talking here, so let me know if put you on the spot. Sorry. Talking to Muslims, let's say Iraq or wherever else it might be, if you're in Kuwait or whatnot. What is the relationship between the Quran and Muslims? I don't want to lead the witness here.
That I saw, right? It was very much of whatever their mosque was teaching,
I see.
right? To me, like I never saw them walking around carrying their Quran, right? You'd find it in their homes. But it is also whatever the patriarch of the family put down that is very patriarch centric, and this is kind of what our family believes the Quran says.
Yeah.
That's what I see.
Interesting. No, that's a great point. In the home, where was the Quran located? I'm really hoping, again, we should have coordinated before this.
I don't know.
Look, so just anecdotally, and what I saw, and this is Afghanistan, not necessarily Iraq. the cultural differences, but it's usually the highest place in the house. And if it's a bookcase or whatever it is, it's the highest, most prominent place. So the Quran to the Muslims is the most, it literally is the word of God. Okay, we had riots where I was because of allegations from the other side of the world that there was some type of desecration from a U.S. service member or something at Guantanamo Bay on a Quran, and then therefore they were rioting where we were, and it was like, this is if that happened with Christians, like we value the word of God, obviously the Bible so much, but at the same time, it's on a completely different level with Muslims.
We haven't turned the physical book into an idol.
That's a great point. Yeah. That's a good way of
If
putting
you
it.
burning a Bible, your heart is broken, but it doesn't destroy the word of God. So
Right.
you just move on with life.
That's a great point. So, and they're very much that with Muhammad too. One accusation that I would totally submit is that they are worshipers of Muhammad. Now, they would vehemently deny that. And they would, I mean, if you said it in certain parts of the world, you would literally be killed for making that accusation. But 100%, that's like they are worshipers of Muhammad. So, which we'll kind of get a little bit. So the Quran points to itself for its own validation. So the miracle of the Quran is that it exists. So should the Quran be considered a miracle?
No.
Okay.
No.
I believe you. I got it. Yeah.
I think if my recollection talking to Muslims is, the Quran was revealed to Muhammad but never written down. So what you're saying there, it was a revelation that was actually hundreds of years later before it was written down.
But it was written in bits and pieces on basically verse by verse on bone, on cloth, on like literally like rib bones and all this as Muhammad was given, and then they were just kind of scattered to and fro. And it wasn't until Muhammad died that all these people that it was an oral tradition.
Yeah.
That they then collected it and then wrote it down. And so that was actually, I think his name's Bukhar. It was Abu Bakr after Muhammad passed away, which it's a whole nother super interesting study. So first off, what's the purpose of a miracle? Just so and what is a miracle? Let's define terms.
Supernatural event,
Supernatural event. So not
birth, childbirth.
Okay.
It has to be something that breaks the laws of nature.
And it's typically used to confirm someone as being from God or what they're doing or saying. is from God.
Which that's what I just in John 20. I know it's probably a word that we're familiar with here, but it's great. Again, in our own vocabulary, like pointing the finger back at us, oh, it's a miracle that this medication worked or whatever it might be. Not necessarily, no. It's not confirming it. There's difference between miracles and answered prayers and say providence of God, where the things you pray for come to be. Now, if I fell out of an airplane, I pray to God for intervention and a miracle, and all of a sudden I sprout wings and I can fly. Okay, that's a miracle. But that's not going to happen. Okay. So John 20, 30 and 31. And surely Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life. And again, purpose of miracles, confirming what he's saying is true, which is so ironic. If you come at it with that perspective, the fact that Muhammad didn't have any miracles, it's like, oh, well, that's self-evident in and of itself, right? Now, what's funny is in the Quran, there's no stated miracles. The Quran points at itself, but then if you remember, there's a whole another set of not scriptures, but kind of teachings. It's called the Hadith. In there, they will claim that Muhammad had miracles or miracle. We'll get to that one in just a second. So here's the question. I was hoping to spark a lively debate with this because it's 100% loaded. Is the Bible a miracle? Got a side.
It's providential in how it was preserved through the ages. Now, how much providence and how much miracle, I don't know.
There was no suspension of natural law. So, it doesn't meet, I guess, the technical definition of a miracle, but it's, I mean. So how, but the men who wrote.
Yeah.
Were
Yeah.
inspired.
It is again, timeline, right? So
It was produced through miracles itself is. It was produced through miraculous knowledge. that was given, and they could prove that through their working of things that we can see. And so. See.
It's recorded, yeah. And then here's what, how many individuals wrote the Bible?
Little over 40.
Yeah, that's a lot, right? So here's another, hopefully we'll get to a little bit of Mormonism next time. So a similarity between Islam and Hinduism, goodness, I'm sorry, Mormonism, Joseph Smith and Muhammad, both revelation, trust me completely. I will bestow this wisdom upon you. You go forth and conquer. Like you don't see that in scripture, at least in correct scripture. There's way too much power. The only thing I can think of maybe that you could argue is kind of like that would be Moses. But even Moses, you had Aaron too, right? It was not a one person. You talk about the kings and everything, but then you had priests, right? So there's not a one person with God, and that's it. The ability for corruption here is just it offends my sensibility just thinking about it.
Well, and both didn't want it.
That's a great point too.
It's written several different times, of just the frustration in the different accounts. So it's different in that he didn't come to the people and say, in a proud way, in the same way that the other two did. What we're gonna do, everyone. I mean,
Right.
we have accounts of how he struggled, so that's very different.
And there was accountability and there was punishment too. I mean, where he was not making judgment. Well, I mean, he would in some manners, but he's rightly dividing.
They were also told to test prophets.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And so there were means to go and prove which prophets were accurate and which prophets were false. And
That leeriness.
disregard the falsehood. You can't prove, if you were to apply Muhammad, Joseph Smith to those same principles, both of them would fail.
And so here's the question. So what? Oh, go ahead.
And Moses himself realized this very thing whenever God told him to go to Pharaoh. He said, how is he supposed to believe that, I'm from the I am? He goes, oh, well,
That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just normal for someone to think that, who would believe me?
Right.
Like, say it's actually from you, God. So I just think the same is true here. Why don't you believe these people?
Right.
No reason.
Along the same lines, thinking about how the law of Moses was delivered, the whole mountain was shaking, there was fire, there was smoke. I mean, there are things beyond Moses' ability and things that were widely seen among the 2 million people who were gathered around the mountain.
And to go back to Zach, so I would submit, and tell me if y'all disagree or agree with this, that we need to have that type of I want to call it godly fear when we're teaching, when we're preaching, when we're talking in class, whatever it might be, of don't trust me. Like, what is our source? Because what we point to is scripture of the Bible. Can the Bible be corrupted? Yeah, you look at the Jehovah's Witness translation and it's been corrupted. So there's due diligence that needs to take place. But at the same time, be very, very leery of say elders, of preachers, of any high personality that's not saying, hey, don't look at me, look at the Bible, fact check me. Like, what's the best sound in the world is when there's a scripture reference and you hear Bibles turning, and you need to come at it from that standpoint. So I think it's a very healthy skepticism.
To answer your third question, I went down a YouTube rabbit hole. If anyone wants it, 10-minute videos of this guy debating Muslims on the Quran. He points out inconsistencies. He points out the divinity of Jesus from the Quran. This guy must have a photographic memory from both the Old Testament and the New Testament. He points out that Muhammad was a pedophile and some other immorality that's baked into Islam. And so if you want that channel, I can show it to you later. So it's like 10-minute videos of this guy just destroying the Quran in a very polite and logical manner.
No, yeah, it's logical.
Yeah.
Right? It's not, so the other miracle in question, I'm spending a little bit of time on this one because I think it's interesting. But two, this is the miracle, right? This is the night journey, okay, which is you have Christian miracles and then you have Muslim miracles, and Christian miracles are like, that's not a miracle. So Muhammad essentially was asleep and had a spiritual journey he was in the town of Mecca, which is in Saudi Arabia, and journeyed to, I think it was Temple Mount, maybe in Jerusalem. I forget the exact location in Jerusalem,
It's the Temple
but
Mount.
is it okay? Yeah, I just
It's in that case study.
wanted to make sure I didn't overstep. Yeah, perfect. So he had a spiritual journey, meaning he dreamt it. And at first, I think he made the claim that it was real, like he had actually gone. And then there was disputes about that, and it was later changed. Well, no, it was a spiritual journey. I left my body and went to here to there's hundreds of miles to Jerusalem. And his wife then later confirmed that, well, no, his body was, laying in bed next to me. That's a great point too. We're gonna get to that in just a second.
Dr. White.
So how would you respond to that type of description? That's a miracle.
Are there witnesses? Besides the wife?
Same type of thing, right? Like I won't belabor the point here, but everything we were just talking about, this isn't a miracle. This can be readily pointed to and say, well, no, there's no witnesses. You just dreamt it. You have epilepsy.
It's
That-
historically, they said he had epilepsy, and in that time, in that era, you were a defective if you had epilepsy, and his wife was the queen of spin doctors. She said, no, it was visions, and got people to believe. And it's a chapter in a book called The Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down. It's a case study from Children's Hospital in California.
Like a back and forth comparing Muhammad to Jesus, but when he arose from the grave, what things happened and who saw him and what did he do? I mean, he like ate.
Yeah.
People like poked him. Touched him.
Yeah.
And like,
Touch my hands.
I mean, these are the types of things. And it wasn't just like a handful of his followers. It wasn't just the disciples that were closest to him. It was hundreds of people, and it was over 40 days. It was a long period of time.
And I think too, and one thing that I'm guilty of, and tell me if y'all agree with this or not, is being maybe way too polite when someone asserts this to me, like, oh, this was the miracle. And they feel so grounded in their faith that they can say it like, no, this is the miracle, that I'm like, oh, well, yeah, okay. And then I try to like politely go another place. And that might be something, but maybe I need to be more, well, I don't believe that's a miracle. And just be as firm and grounded and as they are in their faith as me and my faith. I expect something very much more.
Well, it was just a dream. Is all it was. I know I've had dreams where I went to work and did a whole day work, and I wake up thinking it is 2 days later and disappointed. That he is convinced of, and unfortunately, it was travel and not a solid day where you can prove that it wasn't.
Yeah.
Just a dream.
People didn't deserve it. So another thing too, and I'll kind of get into Arabic culture in a second.
The last wife was 6 years old. That to me is the end of it.
Just jump to
Right?
it, yeah.
He was 9 when he raped her.
So-
She was 9 when he was 54.
Yeah.
They can't defend that. He's a pedophile.
How do you feel? I didn't make it up. Yeah.
Question. So the last class we talked about this, you had said they believe in the existence of Jesus, like as a prophet, but
yeah.
not like the Son of God or whatever. But how do they reconcile that? Because we have these accounts of Jesus doing like actual miracles. Do they just think this is all like nonsense, or like how do they reconcile Jesus into their
From a miracle perspective,
well?
or just
I mean,
so that they would say that the comeback would be that the Bible has been so corrupted as to not be valid. That basically anything you're going to go to, but at the same time, this is again like okay, logical, and then inconsistency is they would go back and they would point to the Bible to justify Muhammad. That Deuteronomy 18:18, I think, yeah.
There's a video on that specific.
They would go a lot of places for that, which it's like, well, no, once you discount this, you can't go back to prove what you're doing. So yeah, that would be a very rush, like they'd brush that off super easy.
so is there any, if they do believe he is a prophet, is there any teaching about him or?
In the Quran, they actually quote Jesus. One of the things you'll see on billboards, it's like, the Quran has the most beautiful phrases about Jesus, which as a Christian, like, really? And then you'll go look it up. And you're like, oh, wow, it talks about Jesus in here, and it's, eloquent verses. And the thing is, it's all false.
Yeah.
It's a falsehood.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's definitely in there. Yeah, so polygamy was a big deal. I think at first it wasn't, then he got revelations that he could. And then there were some restrictions on that. I think it was like 3 wives, but then Allah graciously gave Muhammad permission to marry a ton of wives. And then finally it came down to even that was more women than even Muhammad can handle. And God told him, like, that's enough, pump the brakes, no more. And so they cut him off. I think it was 15, or at least that's what he said. He sanctioned raids on commercial caravans. I mean, when we're talking raids, we're talking about like murder, rape, killing. This isn't, nice raids. Like,
Just pure theft.
yeah, this is slave, all kinds of stuff. And this was come to the point here. This was the culture of like the Arabian Peninsula at the time, very much so. You're talking about dreams a second ago. Lying too is very much permitted in that culture, and then also it's permitted according to the Quran. Not so much Muslim to Muslim, but Muslim to Christian. There's I mean, it's allowed. So just be leery of that. That was something that just as a Christian, I'm naive, or was at least in my worldview, and didn't realize that. It's just something that again kind of takes your breath away. And he was also merciless towards members of other faiths that were captured. It was like, hey, point of the sword, either you say the Shahada or you're dead. And so that's really how a lot of the initial conversions went. So Muhammad is the most righteous man that ever lived. So you just straight burst out laughing when someone makes that claim.
One word, Aisha,
Last wife.
the last wife.
So that's something, again, will be claimed all the time by Muslims. So just be cognizant of that. I hate to just jump through. I wanted to get at least to this question. We might not have the morning stuff. I apologize. But how would you interact someone in that world, let's say from the Middle East? So from the Hindu perspective, you're talking 1 billion people. I meant to make this claim in front of Billy, but I forgot. There's more people in India than there is in China, which kind of was like, really? Wow, like over 1 billion, right? So you think Chinese, oh, it's a ton of people. India is even more so. And then you think Islam, where there's entire swaths of the planet. Where broke all that. Okay, where Islam is a religion, and there's immigration is a big thing where there's more and more people that are migrating for economic reasons or even escaping a lot of this poverty. How do you do that? How do you talk to someone that has a completely different culture than you do?
Gonna bring up at the end of the class anyway. So my experience in dealing with these two religions is with kids and their parents and their kids who have special needs when we have them at school. And in both the cultures or the religions, the view is usually that it's some sort of past sin that's being brought down, or it's a shame brought on themselves. It's a really terrible thing to have a child with a disability of some kind. And sometimes that's why they're even here because of how they're treated there.
Skip the person.
Sometimes we're meeting with them and we're talking about what our plan is and what we're going to do. You're so far apart because it depends on how they're coming to you. If they don't think it can be fixed at all, or they just want you to fix it. There's got to be a way to fix it. And sometimes the work it takes to fix it is you can't really communicate. But that's one of the things I was going to say in like how you can reach people who maybe have those views, because that's not God's view of children with disabilities. That's not God's view of children at all. So that's one way I think if you're talking to someone who's a parent, in even of a typical child, explaining how God views children compared to how that's viewed in those cultures. I don't know how a parent can't want to embrace that love that God has, for children.
And from the kid side, it's so, the kids are kids, until you get to a certain age, then they can go crazy. Well, like they can be the most brutal people on the planet, if unchecked, depending on the age. But like little kids, like you're walking, they're the same as they are here, So that was something that always struck me. No, very good point. Thank you. So Paul, was talking about, if you turn to 1 Corinthians 9 real fast. This was kind of just the question, and maybe it's just something I think about, but how do you walk the line of tailoring your own culture, putting it aside, introspection versus, hey, it's kind of done. And I'm sorry, I waited till the very end, but this maybe some parting thoughts. For certain verse 19 of 1 Corinthians 9. But though I am free from all men, I've made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as Jews, that I might win the Jews. To those who are under the law, as who are under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. For those who are without law, as without law, not being without law towards God, but without law towards Christ, that I might win the more, or win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partakers of it with you. And so the question, even in Western society, even in church, we have our own culture, we have customs here that are not of the Bible, but they are of our culture. And that doesn't necessarily translate all the time to churches around the world. And so we have to be, especially, and I'll say in my position with helping a lot of the men that we support, we come and can come kind of with a heavy hammer of, hey, this is American Christianity, like you need to conform. And we have to be very, very cognizant that that's not of the Bible, and it's actually would be sinful, is forcing someone into our culture. Now, we're not talking doctrine, we're talking about culture. Say one person sitting here, all the people facing this way, presentations like this is the way you do things. Well, maybe not in former communist Poland. They for instance, there's the example I always think of. They sit in one church there, I know of an example. They sat in a circle, and the person that taught, they didn't have a leader. The person that taught, and it was kind of almost a round robin, and that was coming out of the arms of communism, and they didn't want that. Like they would be terrified of our setup right here. So it wouldn't be good for us to go in there and be like, hey, this is the more official way you develop this. Sorry to kind of this word vomit there at the end. We'll jump into Mormonism next time. Should be a good thing.
You did good.
Ready to go. Now, one day we turn.
Good job, man.
Oh, that's good. It's all right.
No.
It's good. Trying to hit 3 religions in the class.
Well, you said what I was gonna say. I think it's actually you start with how they purity.
Yeah.
And how they